On March 16, 2021, 6 women were among the victims of a horrific shooting in Georgia. They were grandmothers, mothers, daughters, sisters, and wives. They were killed because they were Asian. But anti-Asian violence is not new. It is part of our collective memory.
As the families in Georgia mourn and memorialize the lives of their loved ones, we remember the history of racism our community has faced. In 1875, the Page Act passes, banning Chinese women from entering the United States. It's the first federal law to limit immigration.
In 1882, the Chinese Exclusion Act passes, prohibiting Asian immigrants from becoming U.S. citizens. Its discriminatory practices survive for over 80 years. In 1885, 28 Chinese Americans are lynched and murdered in Rock Springs, Wyoming.
1930. Across California, hundreds of Filipino-American farm workers injured and scores killed by rioters. 1942. 120,000 Japanese Americans incarcerated in concentration camps by our own government.
1982. Vincent Chin beat to death by 2 men with a baseball bat right before his wedding. Mistaken for being Japanese, accused of stealing their jobs. 1989, 5 Vietnamese and Cambodian children killed, more than 30 wounded. Stockton, California.
In the wake of September 11, 2001, attacks against Muslims and South Asians surge. 2012, 6 Sikh Americans killed in a temple in Oak Creek, Wisconsin.
This past year, almost 4,000 incidents of anti-Asian violence, including murders of our elders simply walking in their own neighborhoods.
Memory is the antidote to death. Solidarity is the answer to silence.
As activist Valerie Kaur once asked, what if this is not the darkness of the tomb, but the darkness of the womb?
Today, we birth something new, knowing it's up to all of us to keep each other safe and shine a light together.
Wow, that was powerful. So thank you for joining us for today's special bonus webinar, Stop Asian Hate, How to Avoid Racial Stereotypes in Marketing. I'm Veronica Sansev. I'm one of the Commerce Next co-founders. And for those of you who are just tuning in or joining us for the first time, Commerce Next is a community event series and conference for marketers at retail and direct-to-consumer brands. With May being Asian American and Pacific Island Heritage Month, we wanted to host this webinar to stand in solidarity with our Asian community members and create a forum to discuss this very important topic. Hopefully the intro video provided some context for the discussion. Our panel is going to focus on the role marketing can play in the issue. So I am thrilled to be joined today by Gordon Ho. He's the principal CMO and president at Expertainment. Gordon's also a board member for CAPE, which is the Coalition of Asian Pacifics in Entertainment. Ekta Chopra, Chief Digital Officer at e.l.f. Beauty, and Qun Wei, Head of Growth Data and Analytics at Lemonade. We have a lot to discuss, so I'm going to dive right in. So there has been a rise in Asian hate crimes among against people of East Asian descent specifically. What role can marketing play in educating the general public or creating awareness around these issues? And Ekta, if you don't mind, I'm going to start with you.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Thank you for discussing this really important topic. What I'll say is that this definitely it starts from as an organization first not just saying it, but actually taking action against it. So the real challenge for organizations is not really figuring out what we can do, but rather, are we willing to do it? And so for us at e.l.f., I can speak for what we're doing, is we think about all the issues that we stand for inside out. So it's not just about creating awareness internally, but how do we create awareness externally as well? So whether it be, interviewing different people, their thoughts, bringing in external people to come into our organization and do market master classes around the topic, involving the community, giving out resources. So I would say this very much is about sort of the marketing team can really help build more awareness around it. They can actually, create resources for people. They can shine light on these amazing stories that can tell you about the impact it has on human beings, on people itself. So I think marketing is at the center of really amplifying what we can do as a society to really stand against, hate, essentially.
Thank you. And that makes a lot of sense. Gordon, June, anything you would want to add to what Ekta said?
Just to build up on Ekta says, I think that marketing we're very collaborative type people. So I think to the extent that we can work with each other and help support each other, there's a lot of content and that certain companies have done. Ekta was talking about her masterclass concept, which is a great idea. I think all of us have done that. So let's help each other. Let's do best practices, whether it's sharing content, things that can be useful to help educate the people, because a lot of it is education. And I think we can all help each other do that.
Yeah, I'll add, and also this is not hopefully a one-time thing, because we've seen this kind of comes and goes, and the most important thing is to create this environment when people feel comfortable discussing them when certain things come up, especially for Asian community. A very common thing is a lot of things got underreported, right? So we want to make sure people keep track of what's going on and keep educating ourselves. And even for myself, there were huge history of all of this things I didn't know about, right? So like I want to educate myself. I want everyone to know more about the context. And that definitely helps everyone to fully understand why this is happening and what are the potential ways we can make this better.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the powerful role of marketing is just kind of as storytellers and as people who can help people, our communities imagine different possibilities, like using that voice to help educate them about what's going on. A great quote that I found when I was preparing for this was activist Marian Wright Edelman said, "You can't be what you can't see." And to that effect, how do we ensure Asian Americans are not typecast or stereotyped in marketing campaigns? Gordon, I'm going to direct this to you because I know you do a lot of work with CAPE on this issue.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, it's interesting because a lot of times we don't even know that we're looking at a stereotype, right? That's the hard thing, right? Is that a stereotype or not? And that's all the part of the context. I'll say there's a couple things, right? There's a few stereotypes that may exist within the Asian culture. I'll pick three that might be familiar to the audience. One might be like the nerdy male, right? That can exist, or the subservient hypersexualized female. And something that maybe all of us can relate to for some of us is this idea of the model Asian minority, right? So you would say, what's wrong with that stereotype? That's a good one. Well, while it may be that Asians are perceived as hardworking, studious, good at math, etc., on the other side, sometimes they're thought of as too passive. Maybe they're not leadership qualities. So a lot of Asians aren't able to break into the C-suite or the board. In fact, Ascend and other organizations have shown that only 4% of Asians are in the corporate boards, whereas they make up 12% of the employee ranks. So clearly there's underrepresentation, and some of that could be the consequence of being perceived as the model minority. Now, what can you do about it? You mentioned CAPE. So at CAPE, which is the Coalition of Asian Pacifics Entertainment, we believe there's a couple ways to do it. How do we have more diversity in media? Because what people see in television and movies will make a difference on how they think. So one is the writing. How do you get more diverse writers? We have a writers fellowship program where we try to help advance promising writers who submit their scripts to us. We think the best of the best, and we help them nurture it along. And upon graduation, many of them are placed into studio programs where they're writing for studios. So that's going to help diversity of content. Pairing up with writers are leaders. We have a leaders fellowship. So with leaders in studios, they can then greenlight the content that is written by these new diverse content creators. That can also apply to companies. So in your marketing department, do you have diversity of creative teams? Do you have diversity of artists, diversity of writers? Because they may have a perspective of seeing things that you may not, because we all grew up differently, right? And then do you have diverse leaders who has the courage to say, let's try something different. Let's go ahead and look at something differently and let's try it, because unless you try it, you're never going to know. And of course, we're all good at test and repeat, test and learn. I think we all are in this call, but I think we'll employ that philosophy as well. So for us, really, it's making sure we have robust creatives, diverse creatives, as well as diverse leadership who together can make sure we can generate more diverse content that isn't, quote unquote, something that is tokenism or something that's not authentic.
Yeah, and that's such great advice, Gordon. I remember, when Hamilton in particular came out, everyone was saying, how transformative that was, because everyone knows our founding fathers were white. That's just history, right? But when you cast a brown and black cast in those roles, then now you see people in leadership positions that are, brown and black, and that helps kind of people imagine and aspire. And I think one of the things when we prepped, you talked about is like, should race be part of casting? Like you shouldn't think about it. Like it should be the role should be the role. And
yeah, I mean, I think Bridgerton is another example, which is just turn things upside down in their head. And I think we're making progress, but there's still work to be done. And all the people on this call, the audience here, hopefully they can help do their part. And I think what was said about like, hey, we have to foster those conversations, because if you have someone that's shy, they could be Asian or not shy. Maybe you can say, I really want to hear, Ekta, what's your perspective? Encourage the discussions, because if they're not happening, then you need to create an environment of transparency where they can.
Yeah, absolutely. Ekta, Qun, anything you want to add to this question?
No, I mean, I would say ditto to everything that Gordon said. And I'll add a personal thing. My brother is a voice artist. And every time people get shocked, your brother's a voice artist? Like, as if he's supposed to be an engineer or a doctor, And like, yeah, he's a voice artist and he's doing Frankie really well. So I do think that there's so many stereotypes that just hold us back, even from, saying anything. So yeah, I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, I'll echo another point that Gordon mentioned. You really have to make sure the right people are in the room, right? So, and also realizing Asian community has a lot of different type of culture. Sometimes having just one person that's Asian may not be enough, right? So it doesn't mean that you have to always be very careful about, capturing everything, but just be mindful that there are different type of culture, history, and just to factor that in as well.
Yep. Absolutely. That's true. It's not a monolithic Asian group. It's a diverse group.
Right.
Exactly.
I want to change gears a little bit beyond kind of stereotypes from a kind of image perspective, because there's also the algorithms, right? We all remember the Microsoft chatbot that became racist with training. And, how can audience targeting and performance marketing facilitate unconscious bias and potentially discrimination, and what do we do to prevent that? Qun, I was like, sorry, I didn't direct it to you, but I was thinking about you in my head.
Sure, and so let me start with kind of a sentence from a recent article by e.l.f, Electronic Frontier Foundation. It says, the power to target is the power to discriminate. And I think, to be clear, finding the right audience and tailor your message to them is really a big part of what marketers do, right? But in the last, 10, 20 years, the way we do marketing changed quite a bit. And digital marketing, performance marketing really open up a new way to leverage the data and the tracking for marketers, right? You can select your audience, criteria, set your KPI and target, and boom, like, you're waiting for the magic. Of course, the more sophisticated marketer don't just do this, right? You have to understand what are you trying to sell and who is your really target audience, what do they want? But it just becomes much easier to target people in specific ways, including race, gender, and age. for people who kind of remember the early days of Facebook audience network, there was a time you can really select race or age, right? And you can do that directly. Of course, then they got sued, and this is obviously not the right way to do this, so they removed that. And even I think for the race, they only officially removed them completely last year. And you can still find proxies to do this. There are definitely, bad players in the space. They're trying to, a lot of what you call digital redlining, right? You can target people, but on the flip side, you can exclude people as well, especially for certain potential, product. Like we know for like housing and credit or jobs, and there were cases that some company, they intentionally exclude certain audience to be reached by those ads at all. And so that's really dangerous. But in the same time, for people who really have good intention, there are many ways for them to be very conscious about this. One thing that's quite interesting that's happening right now is the privacy, right? A lot of changes that's happening that really aim to protect people's privacy. But in the same time, in order for you to know whether you are doing the right thing, you kind of have to know whether you are targeting unconsciously by race or by certain kind of minority group. Not having this kind of information can be dangerous as well. I don't know how many of you are following FLoC, which is the Google solution to replace third-party cookies. And FLoC stands for Federated Learning of Cohorts. It's a really fancy name, but it basically group people based on your browsing behavior, mostly like the type of visit, website you visit, into kind of a numbered cohort or group. Their argument is we don't even tell you what these groups are. It's just a cohort number. And they claim they will do all they can to make sure this is not a sensitive group. But you have to put a lot of faith in what they do. And also all this machine learning and the AI is not very regulated. So it's very difficult to know whether they're doing the right thing. And I think the key thing is this, in the end, can be a win-win situation. You may be chasing something that looks really good, but you may be trapped in a local optimum. You may be missing out on some audience that you don't even know, right? So this is something I just feel like marketers have to be much smarter and also more proactive about addressing this issue.
And Qun, is there a way that they can test or kind of check and, see if the algorithms are skewing or discriminating in any way that they may have not known? Is there a way to check on this?
Yeah, definitely. I think the tricky thing is a lot of this AI and the machine learning is a black box. So it's very difficult to know what's behind the scene. So what matters the most is the results. It doesn't matter whether it was by design racist, but if the outcome has this kind of bias, then you have to be able to measure them. And I think one interesting thing of measuring and correcting bias in machine learning over bias in human is that you can measure and track it much more easily. You can repeat that many times, right? With people, there are many factors. For this one, you can do certain things a few times. A famous example, I think a lot of people are aware, I think last year, Twitter created this really interesting cropping machine learning tactics that will identify what are the most interesting part of the image, and they crop it. Then people begin to do experiment, and they realize they more likely to only show white faces over any other faces, right? And then you can see a lot of people just are posting random photos. They're doing experiments to show you don't have bad intentions, which I believe they didn't, but this is the results, right? And so let the results speak, and don't just argue, oh, I didn't plan this. Look at the outcome.
Yeah. Ekta, anything you want to add to this?
No, totally agree with what he said. What I will add is bias exists even in sort of, people who are writing these algorithms, right? So the engineers, to what they're thinking is, and sometimes you're relying on that engineer's, build of that algorithm. And I think so it's not just, the tool itself or the platform. And sometimes we'll buy a personalization tool and it'll say, hey, it has all these built-in personalization predictive models. But what are those models? Questioning that. What are they using? And I think that's one thing that's so important is sometimes looking under the hood, because at surface it looks all great and now you can target multiple different people, but who are you excluding? What is the sort of the framework that they're using? I think is so important. So I totally agree with what was just said.
And we talked a little bit about kind of call it roles or kind of creative stereotyping. We talked a little bit about how algorithms can be effective and how not effective, but how they can affect unconscious bias. What else can companies do here? How do they build a culture that's anti-racist and be an ally to kind of all of the diverse groups that are potentially in the company? Gordon, do you want to kind of kick this one off?
Yeah, I think that, I mentioned the leader starts at the top, for the top to be able to create a supportive environment to make a statement, right? It could be an internal email. It could be a post on their social media. Maybe they take out an ad in the Wall Street Journal that says this company does not tolerate Asian hate or biases or racism. That goes a long way for the organization, all the way up and down, to know that this company cares. And number two, I think, Ekta, you talk about master classes, just how do you create forums for people to talk and share and create an environment where people can say, look, I don't feel comfortable with that. And it's hard for people to speak up and say that. So how do you ensure that you as leaders or you as managers, whatever role you play, induce that conversation to make that happen? And then, three, I think I'm going to go back to what Qun was saying about the local minimum. I think that we're all being held to a certain ROI. And the thing is, I do worry you can optimize to a local minimum, but at some point that's not enough business. You need to grow. How do you look at the other global optimums that may exist? I'll tell you a quick story. A guy at Google, I was talking to an executive, and he was saying, I worry about everybody so focused on performance marketing and not looking at a top of funnel advertising, which Google does a lot of. And so for someone, an executive at Google, very high up, to say, I'm worried, I think the same applies. If we go down our own systematic biases, the optimization engines is going to go down a path. So I think it's going to take us as leaders to say, whoa. I know that I told you to maximize the ROI, but I also want us to invest for the long term. And that long term includes maybe addressing some of the systematic biases that have been created along the way.
Yeah, that's really great advice, because I think sometimes it is the short-term thinking that can also encourage people to take shortcuts unintentionally.
Yeah,
I totally agree. I think both Gordon and Ekta touch on this. It's extremely important to ask the right question. I think now, especially when you have so many tools, so many automation, machine learning, all the things to help you achieve your goals, if you ask the wrong question, say, who should I help? Or who should I exclude? Like, those questions dictates what kind of solution you will reach, right? And that's really important. And within the company, that's kind of a culture thing, right? So if you really want to have everyone focused on their goals, then set the right goal. Make sure people are thinking about the right way to, contribute to the company. So I think that is really important.
Great advice. Really good advice. Commerce Next is a community, and we have a number of our community members on this call. I want to kind of, for the last question, I really want to talk about what can we all do to be an ally, and how can we support our colleagues who are Asian or part of any minority group. Ekta, would you mind kicking this one off?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, it's said before, like, it all starts with educating yourself. Understand what the problem is. Seek to understand is so important, because sometimes we just, we're whatever our natural inclination is, we tend to do that, and we don't really seek to understand. Second is educate yourself. Really learn about the issue. Don't just make a judgment right there, and and also pursue your community, your people, your organization to take an action. And I think that's really important, is speak up. Really don't, just take it as it is. Actually educate yourself and encourage other people to take action as well. And I think that's at the center of doing this. So.
Yeah. Qun or Gordon, anything you want to add to how we can all be an ally?
Yeah, and I think also don't be afraid to have difficult conversations, right? So sometimes you don't understand certain things and you may be afraid, am I kind of offending someone? Like ask. And one thing I actually really appreciate Lemonade is internally, we sometimes have really difficult conversations, but that's important. Instead of just keeping quiet, it's important for people to really know and learn from each other. If you don't understand something, ask me. Maybe I don't know either, but we can learn together.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, and Veronica, I think just the fact that you're hosting this session is great. The fact that you played that opening piece, I think a lot of people don't realize this has been this is not just something that's happening now. Certainly there's a catalyst, right? A certain maybe administration and calling it the China virus may be the catalyst for why there's this Asian hate right now, but it's been going on for some time. Not just the Asian community, but clearly the Black community. And I think it's that understanding that Ekta is referring to. Understand there's a history to it and be passionate about it. There are still so many people who are nervous and scared, whether it's, am I safe to go walk? Can I take the subway? And I think for all of us, if we're part of an organization or our own company, reach out to your colleagues. If they're an Asian colleague, ask them if they're okay. Just being there to be supportive and to listen to them, I think goes a long way. And I think, I'll say something about like Kevin Kwan, who wrote the Crazy Rich Asian books, right? Love it or hate the movie helped change stereotypes. Like I told you, it shows that an Asian male could play a sexy role. It shows that a female can be both a professor, but she could be a damn good poker player, which was, of course, Constant Wu's character. But the point that Kevin Kwan said is that, we have maybe a handful of stereotypes for Asians, but I'd like to see thousands of stereotypes for Asians. And I think that all starts with all of us, which is really trying to take the time to understand, create formats, groups of people who can support each other, allyship, as you were saying, and facilitate the discussion. And it starts there. And I think everybody can make a little bit of difference, and together we can make a whole lot of difference. And as we were talking earlier, the anti-Asian hate bill was passed through the House yesterday, so hopefully it gets signed. It can be done at all levels, not just the corporate level, but the political level. So I think there's a lot of momentum, and we hope we can change this, make all of us work together to make this into positive change. That's my hope.
Yeah, and there's one question that kind of came in at the 11th hour, but I want to catch it. It's from Christopher Stark. He asked, as marketers, we like to focus on success. How do we measure the success of messaging, ad campaigns against hate and awareness creation today? So any suggestions on how marketers can measure the success of their campaigns from this lens? Anyone want to take this?
I think one way is some of this are naturally more difficult to measure by like ROAS or like CPA, those kind of thing, right? So to make sure you have something that you already planned in the beginning. For example, surveys do a great tool, right? You want to make sure that you can get some of the more nuanced results from your audience. And maybe this is something you ask. And also some of the survey, you may want to ask some question that can tell you this, right? If you just ask, how did you hear about us? Then you won't find this information, right? Just be mindful about kind of what kind of question you ask and how you measure the success.
Awesome. Well, this was really great. And Gordon, Ekta, anything to add to what Qun said with Christopher's question?
No, I mean, I think Qun answered it really well. But I would say that regardless of, just the monetary aspect, I think it's a corporate responsibility more than anything else. And so not everything will translate into a dollar. And of course, we also have to make money, and all the organizations do. But there is a corporate responsibility piece here. If we say we stand against hate, then we have to practice that in all aspects. And I think that's the thing that I truly believe. So
awesome.
And I think, Veronica, we pulled together some resources. I think I can't remember where it is.
It's in the handouts.
In the handout. So for those, look at the handouts. We tried to pull together some links that might be helpful for people to take action. So as Ekta said, is beyond saying it, I think it's a difference between not being racist to being anti-racist. And so to the extent that you can move your organizations to take action to be anti-racist, I think that's really important.
Awesome. And Gordon, thank you for reminding the audience about the handouts. I want to thank all of you, Qun, Gordon, Ekta, for sharing your insights today. For the audience who's tuned in, I want to thank you for joining. We wanted to close out with a more uplifting video celebrating the Asian Americans in our community. We hope you enjoy it, and we'll be back next week.
Hi, I am Ken Jung. I'm here to celebrate our community for Asian Pacific American Heritage Month.
We're so many things.
We're your neighbors. Come on, bring it in.
We're your friends.
We meddle. We work out.
We move.
We keep you safe.
Like really safe.
If you don't know who we are,
howdy neighbor.
Get to know us.
Asian Pacific.
Asian American.
Asian Pacific. Happy Asian Pacific American Heritage Month.
You're welcome.